Chapter 5. The time after that lingering, Great Depression at the bank passed slowly, like molasses. The awareness of his own illness, one that had not yet been given a name, but was felt in every cell of his being, brought not relief, but a crushing weight. Thomas quit his job at the bank under the guise of finding himself and wanting to pursue further education. Though in reality, he simply couldn't stand the polite smiles of clients, the sympathetically puzzled glance of his colleagues, or his own inability to handle even the simplest tasks anymore. A glass slipped out of his life quietly, without any drama. He himself had done everything to make it happen. His silence, his detachment, his inability to explain or even just to be present had destroyed that fragile feeling that had barely begun to blossom. He had seen the pain in her eyes during their last awkward meeting, but he couldn't find it in himself to apologize or try to hold on her. The abyss within him swallowed everything, including love. Unexpectedly, during one of the rare moments of somewhat clearer consciousness, he decided to actually return to his studies. Not because he suddenly developed a thirst for knowledge, but more out of desperation, out of a desire to cling to some kind of structure, some kind of meaning in life that was falling apart. He enrolled in university, taking evening courses in a field related to economics, something vaguely connected to his experience at the bank, but which seemed somehow more respectable than a diploma from a technical school. His parents supported this idea. Education had always been sacred to them, a guarantee of a normal future. They even agreed to cover the cost of his studies and support him financially until he could get back on his feet. And so began new cycles of torment with rare, deceptive moments of clarity. Studying was excruciatingly difficult. His focus was still abysmal. He could sit for hours staring at a textbook, but the words blurred together, the meanings slipping away. Occasionally, driven by a sudden surge of anxious energy, he would cram all night, memorizing facts and formulas without the slightest understanding. Then there would be days of apathy again. Then he couldn't even bring himself to attend lectures. His condition resembled a pendulum swinging, but without the bright heights of the past, more like a back and forth between dull despair and dull anxiety. He barely interacted with his classmates. The evening program was filled with adults, busy people, each with their own concerns. Thomas, with his introversion and obvious oddness, didn't inspire anyone to make an effort to befriend him. He was a shadow, gliding through the university corridors after work. He had taken up some light job as a courier to have at least a little pocket money and not depend as much on his parents. But time marched on, and his final year was inexorably drawing to its logical conclusion: state exams and the defense of his thesis. This period became a true rest of endurance, of which Thomas had almost none left. The pre-graduation spring and early summer turned into one continuous nightmare. The stress grew with each passing day. The need to organize knowledge he essentially didn't have, write a substantial thesis paper, and prepare for exams all crashed down on his already frazzled nervous system. He almost stopped sleeping. Anxiety gripped his chest in icy claws. He drank cheap instant coffee by the liter, trying to clear the fog in his head, but it only made things worse. His heart raced, his hands trembled, and his thoughts became even more tangled. He passed his exams by some miracle, on autopilot, running on the remnants of adrenaline, on scraps of knowledge that surfaced in his mind at the very last moment. He left the exam room completely drained, his head buzzing, his hands shaking, with no idea whether he answered correctly or not. The defense of his thesis was the pinnacle of it all. He stood before the committee, reciting the poorly connected text of his work, written in the half-delirium of sleepless nights. His voice shook, his palms were clammy. He saw the skeptical faces of the professors, felt their condescending and pitying glances. It seemed to him that he was about to faint or simply break down in tears right then and there. Somehow, he managed to speak until the end. They asked him a few questions, to which he responded off topic. They gave him a satisfactory. It was over. The ordeal was finished. He walked out of the university, holding a diploma of higher education in his hands, which felt like a piece of useless cardboard. There was no sense of relief. Inside, there was only a resounding emptiness and a leaden exhaustion in his entire body. He stayed silent because, deep down, he accepted it. He quit his delivery job. He didn't even have the strength for that anymore. He just wanted to lie down and for no one to bother him. A period of absolute stagnation began. He slept 12 to 14 hours a day, but never felt rested. He barely left the house. He ate out of necessity only because his mother insisted. Time felt like it had come to a standstill. Days blurred into a single gray, dragging mass. His parents were worried, but didn't know what to do. They suggested going on a trip to relax, or visiting a doctor, a general practitioner, of course. Mentioning a psychiatrist was out of the question, as that was something shameful, only for actual lunatics. Thomas refused everything. He had vague plans in mind. He dressed up for a while, pulled himself together, and then started looking for a proper job. Something better than working at the bank or being a delivery courier. Something worthy of a person with a higher education. But these plans lacked conviction. They were like paper boats floating in the stagnant waters of his apathy. The rest period kept dragging in. Weeks turned into weeks, months into months. He began to make timid attempts at job searching. He put together a resume and sent it out to a few addresses found in newspapers and online. Sometimes he was even invited to interviews, but they were a disaster. He would show up tired, with a vacant look in his eyes, answering questions sluggishly or off topic, unable to articulate his strengths or goals. He could see the disappointment on the faces of the interviews even before they politely uttered the phrase, "We'll call you." They never called. Rejections arrived by mail, if they came at all. Each rejection, no matter how expected, was a blow to his already low self-esteem. He felt utterly worthless, unnecessary, a person with no future. Summer turned into autumn, and autumn into winter. The new year was approaching. Thomas realized that he had been unemployed and, essentially, without any meaningful activity for almost 6 months. 6 months of wasted time, a gray existence funded by his parents. New Year's had always been a special holiday for Thomas. Even during the toughest times, he tried not to spend it alone. For the past 5 years, he had always celebrated it either with friends, back when he still had them, or with his girlfriend, Aglaé. But this new year promised to be different. He was left without friends. There was no girlfriend. His group of university classmates had scattered as soon as they'd received their diplomas. There were only his parents left. The prospect of celebrating the holiday as a threesome around a dreary table, with the mumble of the TV in the background, filled Thomas with a dull sense of despair. He felt like a complete loser. All his peers were achieving something, building career, starting families, while he was unemployed, alone, living with his parents in his early 20s. December 31st passed in the usual pre-holiday hustle and bustle, which had nothing to do with him. His mother was in the kitchen, preparing the traditional Olivier salad and herring salad. His father was watching TV. Thomas wandered around the apartment like a shadow, or lay in his room, staring at the ceiling. He already felt the heaviness and awkwardness of the upcoming evening. They sat down at a table. His mother tried to create a festive atmosphere. A tablecloth, candles, her best dishes. His father poured champagne. They made toast. To health, to the new year. May Thomas find work soon. Thomas forced a semblance of a smile and drank silently. The conversation didn't flow. His parents tried to cheer him up, asking him questions, but he answered monosyllabically. He felt like a stranger at this celebration of life. Then came the president's speech on TV. They stood, holding glasses in their hands. Thomas stared at the screen without the slightest interest. The words about the country's achievements and hopes for the future sounded false and meaningless to him. What did he care about all that when his own life was in ruins? Right after the chimes of midnight, when his parents began calling relatives and friends to exchange greetings, Thomas escaped to his room under a plausible pretext. I'll go and watch the New Year's shows in my own space. He felt drained and empty. All he wanted was for this day to end as quickly as possible. He turned on the old television that stood in his room. Some blue light variety show or similar program was on. Pop stars sang songs, comedians told jokes, everyone laughed and celebrated. Usually, Thomas despised such shows, considering them the pinnacle of vulgarity and tastelessness. But right now he didn't care. He simply stared at the screen, not thinking about anything. And then something strange happened. First, they showed some short film, a touching New Year's melodrama about love and miracles. A simple plot, unpretentious dialogue, a predictable happy ending. Thomas watched absent-mindedly, but suddenly felt a lump rise in his throat, and his eyes filled with tears. He tried to hold back, but he couldn't. Tears streamed down his cheeks, hot, abundant, unstoppable. He sobbed uncontrollably, like a child, burying his face in the pillow. He wasn't crying so much because of the film as for himself, for his shattered life, for his loneliness, for the pain he had carried within himself for so long. It was a true catharsis, a cleansing through tears. He hadn't cried like that in years. When the tears finally subsided, he felt a strange sense of relief, as if a heavy weight had been lifted from his soul. He wiped his face and switched the channel. There a comedy show was on. Some well-known comedian was parodying politicians and telling jokes. The jokes weren't particularly funny, more like shallow humor. But suddenly, Thomas began to smile. At first uncertainly, then more widely, and then he started laughing. Laughing so loudly